Hi there. Well, you finished part 1 of the Roundhouse video. It's time for you to watch part 2. So that's going to come up next. Through the rest of this video, I'm going to show you how I finished off the Roundhouse and finally got it onto the layout to the way that you can see it now. I'm up here on the layout right now working on another project, and you'll just have to wait and see what I'm working on now in a couple weeks. Enjoy.
We continue to move through the manual because we're waiting. I've got the windows glued up here. They're going to get painted later. What we need to do next, just kind of moving ahead, is we're going to put more cross supports in. So these windows will get glued here, right? So they get glued there once they're painted. We will then need to put a cross support in front of those windows. Let me set this down so it doesn't fall and break. We're going to put a cross support in underneath there that's going to support the back end of the roof piece. Okay, so that'll just be another piece of this square stock. I'm not going to do that until the windows are glued in place, so I make sure that that support is in the right spot. But if we continue to move ahead, we're going to need more cross supports on every truss. So what that means is, if we look in this image here, so this is the back of the Roundhouse. At every cross truss, there's a cross beam low and a cross beam high at the top, and then angles as well. So we're gonna have to cut all those in. So this is when I start to think, I really hope I have enough left, because there were some mistakes that were made, and I've got some little pieces here. Now that one I could probably use as an angle piece, but. So I'm gonna go ahead and start doing that. Now there is a block here that comes with your kit, 4.4 inches. What that is the gauge for the lower beam. So it is high enough that your big locomotives can still fit. The top beam is obviously just going to go right across the very top, flush with the top of the trusses. So to do this, I'm just going to set this piece here, and I just kind of put it right up against the edge, and then I'll mark it with my hobby knife, and then I will cut it with the Zona saw, and then we'll glue those in place. So I'm going to try to do that now. I think it'll probably be easier to do the lower ones first. Distance should be the exact same if everything's square and plumb. So I can still measure from the top, and then I can drop that piece down. It'll set on here, we'll glue it up, and then we'll do the top piece after that. Because if I do the top piece and then try to do the bottom, I'm gonna bump it, it's gonna break off. I'm gonna have to redo it anyway. So let's get started. So we've started with those back beams for the trusses. So I've got the lower ones in, and as you can see here, there's this is that block that comes with the kit. So you just set that beam right on top of there and glue it in. And it's nice because you can just let it sit there as it dries. Now, I'm doing the same thing that I did before. I'm using the Type Bond 3 for this. It's going to be a really strong wood glue. And then what I do is, after I've got it on there, I use this Instant Bond. So just a little dollop on the top corners, let it sit in for about 15 seconds, hit it with the Instant Bond. That's going to seal it up just enough to allow it to stay in place. So the rest of that Type Bond can then bond in place. So now I'm coming across, I'm going to do the top sections, and then what we need to do is cut the angled braces here. And those are going to be 2.5 inches. So if we pan back over here to this little jig that I had made before for the other angled braces that were about 3 1/4, 3 1/8, I believe, inches, I've changed it to 2.5. So now what I can do is I can take my piece of stock, I can set it in here, and that inside edge there is 2.5 inches. So I can mark it and then cut it with the saw. So I can knock a bunch of those out quickly. We're gonna have to use the miter box for that, because they're gonna be 45 degrees and they'll sit in this area here. So I'm gonna finish up these upper beams in the back, and then we'll probably work on those angled beams before we do the front sections, because I'm gonna have to get my hand down in there. So don't wanna knock those out. So when you're doing these steps, I'm starting to learn, and as we kind of go through this, make sure you're building it in a way that allows you access to where you need to get to. So don't do the top beams first if you then have to do the bottom ones, because you're going to bump them with your hand. And these areas are really small, so you have to be really delicate with what you're doing. Because even though Type Bond is a very strong wood glue, and in most cases stronger than like using nails, when you only have a contact area that is less than a square centimeter, there's only so much strength that it's going to have. So just make sure you're thinking of that as you go through your build process. So with all of these pieces cut out, what we're doing now is gluing them up. So if we look down in here, you can see I've got these angle braces put in. Now these ones have been drying overnight, so we're gonna go ahead and move these blocks. I'm gonna show you what I do to kind of speed this process up a little bit, similar to what I did with the other cross sections here. So we're gonna use the Type Bond 3 glue, as I've been using. I I'm not sure if the manual calls for using the wood glue for this, but it's a lot stronger than the tacky glue. So I prefer to use the Titebond when you can. So I'm just going to add this a little bit on either end. What you can do with your finger is just spread it out. The wood fibers are going to soak. They're going to soak a lot of this glue up. So I'll just spread it out so we have a nice even coat over that surface area. And then to kind of wait and see if it soaks it up, I can add a little bit more. But then what I'm going to do, I'll go ahead and set this here, is I'm going to take, to make this process a little bit faster, is I'm going to take my instant wood bond here that I have, and I just picked this up at the local hardware store. And on the end that's going to be at the top, so this one's going to go in this inside corner here, so it's going to go up like this. I'm just going to put a little bead of this instant bond right along the edge. And then what'll happen is when I take this, I'm going to put it down in here. You can kind of see in the distance. We line it up. Make sure it's even with the front and the back. I'm going to take my instant bond block, spray that, and then I'll hold it in place with one of these blocks just in case that's needed. But what that does is by putting that bead right on that edge, when you push it up, if you get any squeeze out, it's actually going to be that instant bond. And so when you hit it with the lock spray, it grabs it and it holds it and locks it in place. And it doesn't interfere with the rest of the Titebond glue that's there, but it's going to hold it there and allow that Titebond to do its thing. So we can just come over with your finger and clean up any squeeze out from the Titebond that might happen. We're going to have to go over all these joints. You can see some here where we had some chip out when we were cutting. So I'll come back and we'll repaint those. And then I'm going to weather this anyway. You're not going to see a roundhouse with perfectly white beams. They're going to be covered in soot and dust. So we're going to have to come back and do that when we're all said and done. So I'm going to finish this cross member up here. And then we have to add the 2 header beams on all these, and then eventually the angles as well. So we've got some work to do. So I'm going to jump ahead to page 34 and work on the smokestacks now while we're waiting again for paint to arrive for the front door areas. And we can't put once we get the front trim on, then we can do the roof and so on and so forth. So we're going to move ahead to assembling the smoke jacks because this needs to be done ahead of time. The first step is to wash these thoroughly because these come out of a wax mold. So there could be some wax on there. So we're going to go upstairs. We're just going to wash it with some dish soap, let it dry, and then we're going to come back down and we're going to begin the assembly process. But the first step is to wash them. So I'm going to go do that. And I've got my pieces spread out here, but basically to make this, to do this, what we're going to do is you have one of these, the funnels, a stack at the top, and then these 2 little brass pieces that they kind of look like big staples. And what we're going to do, just to help you understand, you'll see that there's a slope here. That's going to go, this section goes like this, and that's going to go against that roof. So this end here, if I tilt back, is going to be sticking out of the roof, and this is going to be the very top, just like that. So these brass pieces are going to hold that in place. So the first thing that we need to do is take these brass pieces, and they're going to get glued in to this spot right here on either end, and then they're going to hold this lid up and in place. So we're just going to take a little bit of CA glue here that we've got, and I'm just going to put a little drop on this inside corner and on this corner here, just like that. Ooh. Working with too much glue today. My fingers are a little rough. There we go. So we're just going to set that aside and let that dry. And if we look at the manual here, you'll see how that all goes together, and that's going to stick up a little bit. So what we have to do is we have to take that piece and we're going to push it down into the top of that stack here. We're going to push it down until it stops. And what we're going to actually use is a piece of wood underneath there. We're going to hold that at a specific height above. So I'm actually going to mark this with a razor. It's going to scribe it. So when I put it through this stack, let me show you what I mean. So when this comes up through this stack, it's going to be out at the specific height, and each one will be even. That's my goal. So let's let that dry. We'll come back here. These brass pieces are glued in place with the CA glue. I have my dowel rod and I've got that little piece scribed there. So what that's going to tell me is I'm going to take this through here, and that's going to give me the height that I want that to stick up out. And basically the reason I have that scribed is just so each stack has a consistent height. It'll just make our life a little bit easier. So inside this, you can see there's a lip there. So it's actually going to probably stop it at a certain point. But what I'm going to do is just put some CA glue inside the corners of this, so that way it'll be bonded in place. There we go. So that is in place there. And I've got the CA glue in there, which will dry and harden that up. So that's one piece done. We're over here at the messy workbench. Excuse this. What came in today from Minuteman Models was my scale coat flat tie, or flat railroad tie brown. And that's what we're going to use for the front door trim areas, and then the windows, the upper windows as well. So I fit these with a quick coat, and obviously I got to come back over and hit them again. But that just gives you an idea of what that color looks like. Underneath here, we also have the wood inlays for the roundhouse. And so these go in the flooring where the rails are. They were put in there so I could get the rails in, and I pulled them out and I painted them with a brown wash. And then what I've basically done is just come over them with some black powders. And then I'm going to come over them again with a black wash to give them this look. And then these are going to go into the concrete. And obviously right where those locomotives are going to come in, you know, you're going to get grime and grease and things like that. It's going to fall in that wood, so it's going to look pretty weathered. So I weathered these pretty hard. You know, I can come back over them with some water and wash some of those powders off if I wanted to. But I kind of like the way they look at this point, and there's no right or wrong way to do this. So next, I'm going to keep hitting these pieces with some of this brown, get them cleaned up. And then we can begin working on the assembly of the windows, the upper windows, and then eventually the door. So we are back over here now. It's amazing how quick these transitions can take place when we're not waiting for paint to dry. So our windows are done, they're painted. So now what we're going to go back to page 20 on the manual, and we are going to be bonding the window fascia here. So if we go back a page, we can actually be doing on page 18, we can begin doing the front fascia as well. And so I'll grab those pieces, and then we get those on, and they're painted also. So what we can do is we'll glue those up first, and then we'll do the windows, just to do this all in order. So we don't have any front extensions on this, so we're going to bond the front scribed opening to post using tacky glue. Just there. So we're going to use Eaglene's tacky glue for this. Using the center gauge to center the door opening over the center line of the track. Trim the edges of the scribed plywood until it is centered over the track center line. The tacky glue works well to bond these. Also paint them before bonding. Go to 35 to 38 for extension, which we don't need. So it mentions the center gauge. So the center gauge is one of the little tools that Bob gives you in these kits. So this tells you it's a 3.5-inch door. It gives you the center of the track. So if we come down a little bit here so we can see the front of one of our doors. Now on the MDF board that I'm assembling this on, I have all the track centers marked, and I did that before I started building when I laid the base down. So what we can do is if we start here, which we'll just start from one side. It doesn't really matter. I think it says start from the left, but right, left, it's all gonna end up the same. So if we put this in here, we have our center of where our track is gonna be marked off. So that's gonna go right there to line up with that. And then we can take our front fascia piece, and that's gonna go right on like that. And we want that centered. So what I have to do, we have to shave it down a little bit. Now, not so much of the door, but the edges, right? So if we look, I don't have anywhere on this beam to adhere the next one to, right? It's gonna keep pushing them out, you know, as we move across. So we're gonna have to scribe down the edges slightly, but keeping that centered. So I have to scribe down a little bit on this side, a little bit on this side, just to move that over so it's centered nicely. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to use this guy and a straight edge so I can make a nice straight cut with that. So what we'll do, and I'm not going to do this on camera because I'll mess it up and probably cut my finger, is we'll take this, we'll lay our straight edge down, and then we'll take our hobby knife and we'll scribe it and cut it. So that's going to be the plan here. And then we'll come back, make sure it's centered, and then we'll glue it up and use some clamps to hold it. So update on here. So I've got the front sections on. We're finishing up a little glue up over here. I did have to scribe them down quite a bit just to get them all to fit. I've got some scraps here so you can see that. But the pad and the straight edge definitely needed to get that in there. The gaps aren't too bad. There's some paint there that I've gotten it back and cleaned up a little bit. Some of that squeeze out. What I will do is I can touch this paint up, and then it's going to get weathered with some, you know, dust, black, you know, soot and things like that also. And then we'll have the door hinges and so on. So I think we'll be okay. I'm now beginning to work on the windows up here. So once I get the windows in, then I'll come back and I'll put the beams in. The supports for the roof will go underneath those. So I'm going to glue those in, same using the white tacky glue. And they're pretty much holding right in place. I have been using, again, just a little dot of the instant wood sealer at the top, or instant wood CA. Hit it with the instant set, and that holds them right in place, which is really nice since I've got most of my clamps working down here to keep these ones in place. So I'm going to go ahead and do the last 3 windows here, and depending on time, we'll put the beams in tonight. So we have the windows are in, the beams are in for the roof supports. What we're going to do now is take these sections of masonite that we have. This is, let's see, about 1/8 inch, and these are going to go. These actually get bonded in the back here. Now they're cut quite large, but what we're going to do is we're going to cut them down so they slide in to those joints there. So they butt up against the back, and then on either side of those trusses, they're not going to sit on top because the roof's going to sit on there. But what that'll do, you know, it'll be a mitered joint there. You know, because it's going to be on an angle, and then just butt it up and glued with some Aleene's tacky glue. This is going to provide a significant amount of support for this structure. So we're going to do that one at a time, and then get that glued in, let that dry, and then we'll move on to the next step. I'm going to try to see how much I can get done here tonight. Got the roof sections are up in the garage drying currently. So we're going to try to get these things cut and in. Now cutting these might be a little bit more difficult. I'm going to have to scribe them. I might go up and use a saw, but we'll see how that works. And then after that, we're going to work on the doors probably. So we'll see where we get. Let's keep working. All right, so we are out here painting the roof panels. So these are the big roof panels, obviously, and they're made of styrene. So I painted them once on one side. These are the front roof panels. So painted them once. We're just gonna go ahead and flip them over. And what we are using to do this is just the Krylon camo flat black. You're probably seeing a trend there. So I've got it here. No, this is actually the Rust-Oleum camo flat black. So we're gonna hit these again with just the rattle can. It's getting low, so I'm hoping I can get 2 coats on these, and then we'll be able to start getting these cut to size and ready to install. We're working on the roofs. They are painted black. They've been sitting for about 48 hours, which is more than we need. Now these are the top roofs. They've been cut. I have labeled them underneath with numbers so I know which one goes where because they're all cut to size. This is the front roof. We're not gonna worry about those yet because I haven't cut them or trimmed them down. So what we're doing is applying the roofing material to this. So the roofing material comes in bag number 28. I have an old cinnamon container that I've used before for like ground cover. So I've emptied that out and I've poured the roof material into that. I'm using just a white glue that's diluted 50%. We're gonna paint that on with one of our cheap paint brushes here. We're gonna paint that on and then shake on the roofing material, and then we'll shake it off onto the newspaper below so we can siphon it back into the spice container when we're all said and done. So basically what I'm gonna do is just paint this on, shake the roofing material on and move paint on there, and then, or paint, glue. Then we're just gonna shake on some of this roofing material. Just like this. Working on getting the front roof pieces fit in. Basically, once you get the first one in, you just overlay them. So got the middle one in there, so I'm gonna place this one down, and then what we're gonna do, the angle on this stall is a little off, as you know, we kind of talked about before. So what I'm gonna do is put this in here, and if it doesn't quite fit, we've got some bigger ones also. So I'm gonna take that out, and I can, this one's much bigger. So I can kind of put that in there, and then lay this one in as it's fit with these other two over top, and then I know where to trim this one down. So I'm just gonna kind of trace it, and then I'll cut it, just scribe it here with my hobby knife, and then we'll get a good fit, and then we'll put the next one in, and then we'll put the roofing material on. So I goofed a little bit in the directions. I was supposed to cut these, which I've done, and then bond them, and then put the roofing material on, and I didn't do that. I cut them and then put the roofing material on because I didn't read clearly in the manual. So I'm going back now and I'm bonding these, and what I'm using, I'm going to use Titebond 3 wood glue to bond these down, and then I'm just weighting them with these to get a nice even seal. So it seems to be working pretty well right now. I've got a little bit of squeeze out here, so what I'll do is just come over that with a micro brush and some water. We'll clean that up, and then what I can do is I can come back over with more of that roofing material at the end. What you're supposed to do is bond these first, and then painter's tape off where you don't want any glue or roofing material, and then put the roofing material on while it's here. I did this up in the garage, which was easier because it's not as messy, but you know, to each their own. So I messed it up, but this seems to be working fine. So there you go. Now, while I'm here, I'm gonna go waiting for these to dry because I only have so many of these weights and square blocks. I'm gonna start weathering the inside here. So I'm gonna take some powders and just start rubbing them on the wood to create more of like a soot look on the inside. So that's the plan. So if we look here, I've got the roofs bonded down, got some weights just holding the front roof down. The back roof here, I've just got the third one's still out in the garage, but thought I'd show you what I'm working on. So I got these in. The next thing to do is to take the painted and weathered smokestacks or smoke pipes here, and we're gonna glue these in place. So to do that, you put a little CA glue on the inside of this, and then that just fits right over top of this piece, like so. So if you look up underneath, you can see that smokestack coming through the top. Ooh, it's gonna get a little blurry there on you. So what that does is, if we look here, that's still loose, but it's bonded in. So you can't glue it before you put it in put it here. So you put the one in, then stick the pipe up to the bottom, or vice versa. Now also, you should know that on this, notice that angle, so that the thicker part's going to be at the back because that roof slants down. So that piece is going to be towards the rear. So it's like that. Okay. So just make sure you note that. And like I said, don't glue them here. Glue them in the roof section. These do not get bonded down. Again, I mentioned that earlier, so they can pull them up. And those pipes will just be, you know, in there permanently because they're glued in place. Now, we could put a bead of glue around the edge and then hold that in place. But honestly, nothing's really going to be moving it, so I don't really see a purpose to do that. I think it's better to have a little bit of play there than glue that down. If we ever had to remove that for some reason, we'd be tearing off roofing material. So at this point, I'm not going to glue that in. I mean, it's not going anywhere right now, so I think we're okay. Well, this is certainly a different view. What we're going to be working on now, we've got this thing up on its side, as you can see, which is kind of crazy and scary to think about. We're going to be working on steam pipes. So the back section here where that valve is going to be in the back over here. These are already shaved down, so this should fit nicely right where we need it. So we're just going to come over this with a hobby knife and cut the tape. Pull that off. And so he's already got a little bit of a little painted knob there. Excuse the child noises in the background. So as I said, I've already shaved these posts down. And the reason we do that, you can look on these ones here, see how it's shaved down compared to this one here, is so that pipe can fit right over top of that, and then they come right up there. So we're gonna go ahead and just apply some glue on those and let it sit there and weight it down, and then we'll flip it to the other side and do the other side. While I have this up, I can also begin weathering this wood a little bit. So while I've got the steam pipes drying, I've already painted the light poles just with an aluminum silver, and I covered up the LEDs as I did that with some painter's tape, so we can pull that off. Now the light shades in his manual are painted green. I'm going to leave them silver for now because I don't think you're going to see them that much, and I don't have any green on me. What we're going to do is fish this through, and these are going to get glued in on the beams. So we're going to find out where exactly that's going to go. We're going to sand down the wood to adhere that on, and then we're going to set up. So I have this up on the side. What we're going to do is put the inside door frame on here. So this is painted as well. I painted it the rust-type green for some contrast, or brown rather. It does look green. Notice how it doesn't fit quite right. So we're going to sand it down, and then we're going to just use some of the Aleene's tacky glue, get that bonded in there nicely. Got the turntable, or the roundhouse turned around, and I've got these pieces here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a brass tube with some 100 grit sandpaper wrapped around it, and I'm going to cove out the back of that, and then also sand this joint flat, and then that will get adhered there with a 15-minute epoxy. So that's the plan there, and it's a little long, so we might have to trim that up. And we want to make sure when we do this that the brick lines up. So that's a key here. So what we're doing here is instead of a brass pipe or wrap, this is just 150 sandpaper. I'm just gonna sand it right in the middle to get it cove. So I've got those back braces on. I've started to do a little bit of a whitewash in some places just to look like, you know, that the masonry kind of leaking out, or, you know, just a little more weathering to it. Now I'm gonna work on the caps here, and this corner piece sticks up a little bit. Let's get that to focus. Excuse the barking dog. That sticks up, so I'm sanding that down, and then we're gonna glue the cap pieces on, those concrete cap pieces. We painted those way back with the khaki color, Rust-Oleum. So we'll sand that down and put the caps on, and then we can put the roof back on, spin it around, and take a look, and it'll be ready to go on the layout at this point. We haven't wired up any of the lights yet. That'll have to be done later. I'm gonna have to do the doors still, so we still have work to do, but this is really coming up here on top of the base. What we're gonna be doing is doing some weathering of the front of this. So what we're going to be doing is, you know, where the train pulls in here, you know, you're going to have grime and things like that that have fallen off the train. So this is not going to be nearly as clean. Now we've got wood runners that are going to fit into these sections here. I've actually got them here. So these fit in to here. These are going to get painted and weathered as well. But for now, what we're going to do is just add a black wash. So what I've got in this cup is just some black paint that's watered down. And what we're going to do, basically, I'll just do some here. You just kind of paint that on. And it's, like I said, it's just a wash. And you can even just dab it with a paper towel to get that on. And so we're going to do our best here to mix this up and see how it goes. I do the same kind of wash for my concrete workover by the passenger station also. Same off the front as well. what we can do is just kind of dab up a little bit. Paper towel. And this is pretty diluted. So what we can do is we can always come back with one that's not quite as diluted until we get it to the right color. But it's easier to add more later than overdo it. You don't want to do too much and then have it be difficult to undo later on. What I've done is I got the tracks put in place. So the base is mounted. What I did was I took the tacky white glue that we've been using, the Aleene's tacky glue, and I basically run a bead inside the channels for the track, slid the tracks in, and then screwed them down using Atlas track screws at the front. And I did these 2 tracks at a time and then the middle one separate. But then just using these blocks here, sorry about that, using these blocks to hold that track down. That bead of glue should kind of hold that track up just a hair, so that way we will be able to, it won't be too low, you know. There's some glue in here, you know, basically what I've been doing is taking a paper towel and just running it in there to clean that up. So I'll go back and do that and get that cleaned up, but for the most part, when that dries, we shouldn't see too much of that. So we should be in pretty good shape. Then what we have to do is solder some wires. So I started to do that a little bit. Those 2 tracks, I've got to clean that up, and I ordered another thing of paste flux that should help with that process. So that's where we're at right now. So that's a little bit different than what was going on over at the other side with the construction itself. While some of those beams were drying, I figured I'd get this knocked out and start measuring up some of the other whisker tracks, and then we'll begin wiring that up. The wiring of these, other than soldering them, is going to be in another video of just cleaning up the wiring under the layout. I'm not going to include that in this build process because it's not totally connected. So that's that. We're going to get a fewer whisker tracks on that far side of this, but we're going to get those measured, cut, and get them in place, and hopefully in a week or so we'll have some, be able to put some more ground cover on the layout. We've worked on cutting the expansion joints in just with a hobby knife and a ruler, and then what I did was I cut some, you know, stress fractures and things like that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a black wash, so a couple of drops of black airbrush paint and some water. I'm going to take a paintbrush and just kind of paint that on, and then dab it up with this, and the paint will sit inside those expansion joints. This is the same way I did my concrete on the platform over there. I have a video on that as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that and see if I can get some footage. So black wash is on, so you can see the expansion joints and the stress fractures just pop out a little bit more. It also adds another layer of grime to the concrete. So, you know, I'm pretty happy with the way this looks, and this is gonna go under the roof, so it's gonna be dark and you'll see some shadows and things like that. If you want, after it dries, you can come back and put another coat of wash over it, or use like a little bit of a brown mixed in there too for some dirt and more grime. Since this is the inside of the building, I probably won't do that. You know, and I also won't put any like weeds growing through or anything. Now, I do plan on putting some concrete on the outside, and I'll put some expansion joints in that, and there I will put some weeds kind of coming through those stress fractures and cracks, just like you would see in the real world. So that's how we do that. So going back a little bit here, I'm a little bit further along. I've actually dry fitted this already, but I wanted to show you how I hooked up the lights, because I had an idea of what I was going to do. I had originally gotten some brass rods, and you can actually see the remnants of them. I kind of put these braces in, drilled holes, and had a brass rod that ran all the way through. And then what I was going to do is solder the wires to that brass rod. And I had 2 brass rods for positive and negative. It's going to solder that to some wires and then have that connect the lights. Well, brass doesn't conduct electricity quite as well as copper does, and I wasn't able to get the power that I needed for the lights to actually illuminate. So I backtracked and changed my plan. And so what I did was I took 2 just pieces of wire. One is a solid strand wire and one is not. That's just happenstance. What I did was I sprayed them with a silver Testor's spray paint and then ran them sort of like conduit up in front of this beam here, and that red is starting to show through, but then up and then curved it, and I just glued it in with some CA glue. And then what we'll do is solder them. That was soldered, and I just knocked it off. So we'll tighten that joint up. Soldered that to another piece of wire that I actually already had here.
that wire I stripped in certain spots to solder the leads to. So ideally this would be one strand of wire that comes all the way through and down. I did this in a couple of different steps and attempts, and so that's why I've got 2 pieces of wire, and now I'm dealing with getting them soldered together. So we're gonna get that done. And then what happens is this comes down, and you'll see how it extends through. What I did was I drilled a hole in the base right where that beam is, just in front of it, and that drops right through there to underneath the layout. I then bend these wires and connect them to the power supply for the lights themselves. So that's working out pretty well. These lights are not all that bright. I've got 3 light fixtures, and typically you'd have 4. I could add another one if I want to. I just have to call Pop and order it. I only ordered 3 because when I ordered this I was trying to save some money. You know, it's an expensive build. Maybe I should have just done it all at one time, but you know, I made the choice when I did. So if we look in here while I've got it upside down, you can see some of the weathering with the powders and stuff. I realized that I was going through and looking at some footage as I was getting the build video ready here, and I realized I didn't really show any of that. So you can see the weathering and things like that. So I took some weathering pencils to make some streaks where you might see some rust at nails and things like that. And I also did the side walls a little bit, so you can kind of see that finished interior product. What I'm about to do is get this turned over. I drilled a hole here for these wires. I'm going to set it down and begin getting the doors on. So that's the next step.
Now it's time for the doors. So we have these hinges here. Now these are extremely fragile. In here we have the hinges, the hinge pins, and then we've got the hinge piece that actually attaches to the door. What I did was I took some painter's tape and I flipped it upside down so the sticky side was up, and stuck those down onto that, and then spray painted them black, and then put the pins in through the hinges. And I did that when I should have done that first and then painted them. So I had to go back and repaint those. Then I'm going to snip that metal tab off so you don't have that whole pin sticking out, so it looks like that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to CA glue these down. Now again, these are very fragile. 4 per door are going to get glued down onto those doors just like this, and the directions will explain that there's a little tab that kind of holds them all in the same place. This is very, very tedious, as well as the part of getting these onto the frames. So take your time. I broke a couple of these when I was hand drilling them out. So just like I said, take your time with that. That is page 38. It will help you out and kind of guide you along. There are brass hinge options, so that's always an option that you can upgrade to the brass hinges. I did not, and you have to hand drill all of those little holes out, which takes some time. So,
Well, we are here and we are ready to do some doors. You'll notice I put some weathering here on the front of this as well. So I've got the doors here, and I realized I didn't film the construction of these, but they are laminated. There's 3 pieces that are laminated together and then painted with a PRR Caboose red. Now, you should have done the flat. I did not pay attention to that when I ordered it. I ordered like a semi-gloss, so I actually hit it with a flat clear coat over top, and still a little shiny, but it's not terrible. I then had the hinges, which I've got some shots and some voiceover on. I painted those with a flat black and then assembled them by putting the pins through the holes. You will need a little hand drill with a very sharp small bit. It is a 0.024 bit, I believe is what it was. It's in the manual. And then it's a tedious process. You have to drill out the hole in the hinge, drill out the hole in the attachment hinge piece, and then drop that pin through there. I'm bending them back for now. It says to flatten them so they don't come back out. I couldn't really do that with the tools I have, so I just bent them back. I think that's good. And these will sit here like this. They're going to get mounted right against there. And for the most part, these will always be open. So the thing is, there's a little hole in the front of these. Let me see if I can get this to focus for you. See that little tiny hole? We're going to make, that's drilled out already. And there's some more pins that we have. And here, those go through there. Now these are quite long. I'm going to shorten them up. But the pins will go through those holes and then into, we're actually going to push them back through this wood. Now, the key piece is that a step we haven't taken yet is we have to put some more of this 1/4-inch stock back here. Because if we look, this is just thin plywood. There's a beam back there, but it's not, I can get a whole finger. If we take this, it'll show you just how deep that goes. There's another whole
I can fit another whole beam back there. So we need something to support that pin. It's going to hold those doors in place. Now, is that necessary? According to the directions, it is. So that's what we're going to do. But if I just tacked those on with glue, and for the most part, these doors are always going to be open, so it might not necessarily be needed. But I think if you flex these enough, it could torque enough to pop that glue off. So we're going to play it safe and try to get those pins in there as best we can. This is the really, really tedious project of this type of, or tedious part of this type of project. So the first thing I need to do is get the wood in the back before I can actually put the doors on. Now, not all of these are the same. The distance from here is just really, really thin, or the distance on this side of that beam is a lot thicker because it's just not perfect. So what I did was I went out to my hobby shop and I bought some more wood. I bought really thin pieces, thin strips, so I can cut these and then I could laminate some of these up if I can't fit a full 1/4 inch stock piece in behind there. And we're going to type on glue that or tacky glue it in, and then we're just going to keep moving right on down. So that's going to be my goal here. They don't have to come all the way to the bottom, and they're just going to be white. I don't have them painted black. I can paint them black later if I want to, but that's going to be our plan. So I've got my Zona saw back out. We're going to measure and get those cut and put in place, and then we can do the doors. And there we have it, all said and done. And you've seen the ribbon cutting ceremony probably by now, but we finally got this thing down on the layout, and it looks great. A couple things of note as we finish this up, I did add some extra pieces to the base. So the base just covers the footprint that the roundhouse sits on. So I cut some extra 1/2 inch plywood here. This strip, you can actually see the joint there from the base to where this begins. That just kind of comes up and goes right along the edge here. And then I cut in some expansion joints into that as well. And that's just a sheet of 1/2 inch plywood rather. At the front of the roundhouse, I added some 1/8 inch hardboard pieces to the middle of those stalls. And you can see I've cut some expansion joints into those as well. And that's just to extend out that concrete out to the front. And then maybe I can add a figure or a few in time out to the front, and just kind of extends the dimension of the roundhouse itself, as opposed to the doors just opening up to a ballasted track that goes right to the turntable. I felt that there should be some more platforms out there for workers, especially when we see the daylight at the end there sticking out. You know, there's some work that might still be done to those engines if they're not fully in the roundhouse. And so we want a platform for those workers to work on. One thing to point out on these, like I said, they just sit right on top of the track ties there. I measured and cut them to fit. You'll see that area where it's cut out in the bottom left-hand quadrant of the piece up front here in the foreground. That's cut out because of the feeder wire for my track. Now, I do have a plan. What I did is I took some of my ballast and I'm spraying it with the khaki brown, and I'm going to fill that in with some broken pieces of khaki brown ballast. And that's going to look like cracked concrete. And I'll put that in some other areas around these platforms as well. So it looks like, you know, it's old, it's weathered, it's been cracked, and there's some just rubble and things like that. And that'll fill that gap in a little bit as well. But honestly, I haven't even noticed them too much since I put the roundhouse on the table, because when you're looking from a far distance, you don't really see them. That wraps it up. That is the end of the build video here, end of part 2. If you made it this far, if you're working on building one of these yourself, I hope you found this useful or beneficial. This was a process. I did enjoy it. I love the final product. I enjoy seeing this on the layout more than I enjoy building the model itself, but it was quite the process, and the fact that I built it means a lot, as opposed to just buying something that's already done. Now, you can purchase this kit and have it built by Bob Spalding from Altoona Model Works. It's going to cost you more. It's going to take you a lot longer to get it as well. My recommendation is to build it yourself and make it yours. You know, this was it's a great addition to my layout, and so it was well worth the time. So thank you so much for watching. Appreciate you. Like the video, share it out there. Leave me a comment if you have any questions. There's an email available in the About section of my YouTube page. So shoot me an email. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have, whether it's about this or something else. And have a great day. Thanks, everybody. Bye.